The Lust of the Serpent. There is a kind of rain in Kii province that seems to arrive on purpose. Not weather so much as an appointment nobody remembers making. Under a fisherman's low eaves, a young man named Toyoo sat out a sudden shower. And a young man sitting out a shower is not usually the beginning of anything. Then a voice came from the roadside asking very politely to share the shelter. Toyoo looked up and saw a woman perhaps 20 years old, drenched to the collar and somehow none the worse for it, a maid at her shoulder holding a bundle she seemed determined not to let get wet. The woman's eyes met his, and something in her face did the thing that water does to a low place in the ground. It simply found him and settled in. He lent her his umbrella. He did not yet understand that some loans are never really returned, only exchanged for something heavier. Chapter 1. The House in the Dream. Toyoo was the third child of Oya no Takesuke, a net owner of some means at Miwa Point, where the fishing was good and the expectations were simple. His older brother, Taro, was steady, dutiful, and entirely uninterested in anything that couldn't be hauled up in a net. His sister had married well and moved off to Yamato. Toyoo alone had turned out gentle in a way the family didn't quite have a use for. He preferred poems to nets, and his father, more resigned than disappointed, had let him study under the Shingu priest Abe no Yumimaro, rather than force a trade on him he'd only resent. It was on his way home from a lesson, under a sky that had turned from clear to pouring in the space of an afternoon, that Toyoo took shelter in a fisherman's hut near the Asuka shrine. The old man who owned it fussed over him with more courtesy than the seat deserved, and Toyoo had barely settled onto the worn cushion when a woman's voice, unexpectedly fine for a roadside, asked to share the eaves. She came in soaked through, a young maid behind her, and the moment their eyes met, she colored and looked away, which somehow made the impression worse rather than better. Toyoo made room without quite deciding to, and heard himself say, half to fill the silence and half because it was the only thing his mind offered him, "Cruel, this rain, falling here, of all places, at Sano Crossing, when no house stands to shelter anyone at all." It was an old verse about this very stretch of coast, not his own, and he'd never had much cause to feel the truth of it until just now, with a stranger's knee close enough to his own to make the borrowed cushion feel smaller than it was. She looked at him a long moment before answering that the poem suited the day exactly. And something in the way she said it told him she meant it as more than politeness. He learned little that first hour, that her name was Manago, that she lived nearby, that she had gone to pray at Nachi and been caught by the weather on her way back. It was enough. He pressed his umbrella on her when the rain refused to ease and asked, with more nerve than he'd known he had, where he might come to collect it again. "Ask for the house of Agata no Manago near Shingu," she told him, and slipped out into the rain that had, if anything, gotten worse. He dreamed that night before he ever saw the place. A high gate, shuttered windows, the deep hush of a household expecting no one but him. In the dream, she received him as though he were already promised to her, led him to a private room, poured wine with her own hand, and by the time he woke at dawn, he could not have said which part of the night belonged to sleep and which to the ache of wanting it to have been real. He went looking that same morning and asked the way of everyone he passed, and found no one who had heard the name. It was afternoon before the same young maid crossed his path and led him, without a word of surprise at his sudden arrival, to a gate exactly as tall, exactly as shuttered, as the one from his dream. And it struck him, absurdly, standing in front of it, that the verse he'd recited under a stranger's eaves the day before, the one insisting no house stood anywhere along this coast to shelter anyone, had turned out to be the single wrong thing about that entire afternoon. He told himself the rest was coincidence. He told himself this the particular way people do just before they stop needing to. Inside, over food too fine for a modest household, Monago told him what she hadn't the day before, that she had been born in the capital, orphaned young, raised by a nurse, married off to a minor provincial official who had died that spring and left her with nothing but this house and a debt of loneliness she didn't know how to repay. She said it with her cup held just so, the wine catching the last of the daylight the way cherry blossoms catch it on the water. And when she looked up at him, her voice had gone soft and low, a warbler picking its way branch to branch through an evening wind. "I could have let this die unspoken and simply grieved for it in silence," she told him, "and let people believe some jealous god had struck me down, when the truth was only that I loved a kind man and was too proud to say so. Don't mistake this for an idle woman's fancy. I am asking you, plainly, shamefully, to let me spend what's left of my life at your side." Toyoo, who had spent his whole life being the family's harmless dreamer, wanted very badly to say yes, and knew, even as he wanted it, that he had nothing to offer a wife. No household of his own, no betrothal gift, nothing but a young man's late permission from a father who hadn't been asked yet. He said as much, haltingly, more honestly than he meant to. Monago's face fell exactly as far as his hesitation seemed to deserve. "Then let it have been only the wine talking," she said, folding the confession back up as neatly as she'd unfolded it. "Throw it into the sea and think no more of it." It was that, her willingness to take the wound back rather than let him carry the weight of refusing her, that undid what remained of his caution. He told her he would find a way, that even a man with nothing could still want something enough to make room for it, and she brightened at once and pressed into his hands as a token between them an old sword mounted in gold and silver, a blade forged with a weight and a menace that seemed wrong for a lady's dowry. He hesitated only a moment before he took it. To refuse the first gift of a betrothal, he told himself, was worse luck than any doubt he was still carrying about the gift itself. He carried it home wrapped against his chest through a night that had finally stopped raining, already rehearsing, badly as it turned out, how he was going to explain a happiness he did not yet know how to explain at all. Chapter 2. What the Sword Cost. Taro found it before Toyoo had a chance to hide it, which was, in its way, the whole problem with hiding things from an older brother who rises before dawn to see the nets out. "Where did you get this?" he said, and it was not really a question because Taro had already decided the only honest answers were theft or foolishness, and was leaning toward believing it might be both. Their father, roused by the noise, demanded the same thing in a harder voice, and Toyoo, cornered between two men who would think less of the truth than of the silence, found he couldn't make himself explain a courtship he barely believed in himself, not standing in his father's doorway with his brother's contempt already settling into his shoulders. "I won't say it here," he told him, and his father's face went the particular white of a man deciding in real time to be furious instead of frightened. "Then who will you say it to, if not your own family?" It was his sister-in-law, gentler than either of them, who drew him aside and coaxed the story out. The rain, the woman, the umbrella, the promise, and carried it back to her husband with more sympathy than the household had shown so far. Taro's suspicion did not soften. If anything, it sharpened, because he had heard something in the past week that made the sword itself impossible to ignore. A set of ceremonial treasures, old brocade, ceremonial spears, tools of formal, ancient make, had gone missing from the shrine's own storehouse, a gift from a minister of the capital in thanks for an answered prayer. No provincial widow of modest means, in Taro's plain accounting, owned a blade that belonged beside such things. He turned the sword over once more in the lamplight, exhaled the long breath of a man about to ruin his own brother for the family's sake, and took it to their father. "There is no other way to see this," their father said, and it broke something in his voice to say it. "Report it before someone else finds it first." The shrine officials confirmed it before Toyoo had even finished explaining himself to them. He was arrested that same afternoon, and the last thing he understood clearly, before the interrogation blurred into the particular gray exhaustion of being disbelieved by people with the power to hurt him for it, was that happiness, in his family's accounting, had turned out to cost exactly as much as the sword that had bought it. Chapter 3. The House That Had Already Fallen Down. The officer who questioned him wanted names, accomplices, the location of whatever else had gone missing with the sword, and grew angrier, not gentler, every time Toyoo answered with the truth instead of a confession. "There is no clerk in this province by the name Agata," the man said, when Toyoo gave Monago's account of her late husband, and took the denial itself as further proof of guilt. It was only when Toyoo begged, with what little dignity fear had left him, that they simply go and find the woman and ask her themselves, that the soldiers agreed to march him back to the gate he'd walked through twice already. What they found there was considerably older than the mansion Toyoo remembered. Where a great house had stood, new-looking pillars, deep blinds, the unmistakable comfort of money, there was now a ruin. A broken gate grown over with fern, a roof half collapsed, the particular silence of a place nobody has lived in for years. A neighbor, questioned, confirmed it without hesitation. The house had belonged to a merchant whose ship, and whose whole household, had vanished at sea 3 years before. No one had set foot inside since, the man added, except a young stranger who had gone in the day before and come out again alone, looking as though he'd seen something he couldn't explain. Toyoo could not explain it either. He stood in the ruined garden while the soldiers pushed through the wreckage ahead of him, and there, in a room thick with dust and mouse droppings, sitting perfectly composed against a broken screen, as though the house around her were exactly as grand as she remembered it, was Monago. The soldier who reached first to seize her, a man named Kosei no Kumagashi, bold enough to go where the others hung back, never got the chance. Thunder split the sky directly overhead, close enough to throw every man in the room flat against the floor, and when the shaking stopped and the soldiers lifted their faces from the boards, the room held nothing but settling dust and a fallen screen. Scattered across the floor where the woman had been sitting was the shrine's entire missing treasury: brocade, blades, ceremonial tools, gleaming as though it had simply been waiting there to be found. Toyoo was cleared of intending the theft. He was not cleared of having carried the goods, and he spent the better part of a season in a provincial cell before his family's money bought his release. When he finally walked free, he did not go home. He asked instead to be sent to his sister's household in the market town of Tsubaichi in Yamato. Far enough, everyone hoped, that whatever this had been might finally be persuaded to stay behind in Ki, where it belonged. Chapter 4. The Second Wedding. Tsubaichi sat near the great temple of Jasei, and every spring the roads filled with pilgrims come to pray to its famous cannon. And every spring the little shops that lined those roads filled with customers buying incense and lamp oil for the climb. Toyoo's brother-in-law, Tanabe no Kanetada, kept one such shop, and it was there, among the ordinary bustle of a pilgrimage season, that the maid, Miroya, spotted him first. Toyoo fled to the back of the house the moment he saw them. It took Minago herself, following him with the same unhurried calm she had always had, and a story ready before he could even accuse her, to bring him back out. The ruin, she said, had been staged, a frightened neighbor's trick, meant to convince the soldiers there was nothing left to find. The thunderclap nothing more than Miroya's cleverness at exactly the wrong moment for Toyoo's peace of mind. She had fled by boat to Osaka afterward and gone to Jasei to pray. Not with incense alone, she said, but with the old verse pilgrims still murmur at the twin cedars by the river there. 2 cedars stand at the old river's edge at Hatsusi. Though the years should carry us apart, let us stand together again. And here they were, she said, on this very road, in this very season. Wasn't that proof of something? That a prayer said properly to the right God eventually gets answered? Kanetada and his wife, who had heard only the frightening half of the story secondhand, found the woman in front of them entirely too graceful, too sincerely wounded to match it. They took her side before Toyoo had finished deciding whether he still had one of his own. Within days they had talked him into a wedding they arranged themselves, and within weeks Toyoo had let himself believe, the way a tired man believes almost anything that lets him stop being afraid, that the trouble in Ki had simply been trouble, and was over now. Spring wore on toward its best weeks, and Kanetada, in the expansive mood of a shopkeeper who has just had a good season, proposed a family trip to see the cherry blossoms at Yoshino. The good men of old looked on it and called it good, and said so, he quoted, pleased with his own cleverness at the old pun on the place name. So look well, all of you. Yoshino asks nothing more of anyone than that. Minago demurred. She suffered, she said, from a lifelong weakness in crowds and long travel, but relented when the family insisted she be carried the whole way and never made to walk. She went. She did not want to. Neither in the end did it matter that she didn't. Chapter 5. What the Old Man Saw at Miyataki. Yoshino in late spring was exactly as beautiful as everyone had promised. And for 2 people who were, by any outward measure, newlyweds on holiday, it should have been an easy kind of happiness. They stayed the night at a temple Kanetada knew, and the next morning walked down through the valley to Miyataki, the old site of the departed palace, where the river ran fast and cold over the rocks, and young sweetfish fought their way upstream against it. An old man came toward them along the riverbank, white-haired, weathered, moving with the unhurried sturdiness of someone who has spent a whole life outdoors. He looked the party over the way a man checks a fence line, out of habit rather than suspicion, until his eyes reached Minago and Miroya, and then the habit sharpened into something else entirely. He said quietly enough that only the nearest of them heard it, that they should be ashamed, that this was no place for a thing like them to be walking about pretending at a human face. Minago and Miroya did not answer him. They rose together, without a word passing between them, and went straight into the river. The water did not simply close over them. It rose, a column of spray leaping upward as though something enormous had passed beneath the surface at speed. And the sky, which had been clear a moment before, went black in an instant and opened into rain hard enough to drive everyone off the rocks and back toward the trees. The old man, once the party had gathered itself and stopped shaking, introduced himself without ceremony as Taima no Kibito, a priest of the Oyamato shrine. What Toyoo had married, he said, was no widow and no woman at all, but an old serpent, a creature whose nature had always run toward exactly this kind of hunger, drawn to Toyoo, if the priest was any judge, by nothing more complicated than a handsome face. It was not, he added, without a kind of interest in Toyoo himself, entirely the serpent's doing. A man who lets himself be flattered past his own good sense has done some of the work of his own undoing, and would need more than luck to undo it a second time. Toyoo returned to Tsubaichi and then home to Ki, chastened in a way that no thunderclap or ruined house had managed to chasten him before. He carried back with him the old priest's plain, unglamorous instruction that the only defense worth trusting was his own resolve, and that he had not, so far, shown much of it. Chapter 6. The Second Bride. His family, hearing the whole of it now, decided that a wife might do what fear and distance had not, and settled quickly on Tomiko, daughter of a local family head named Shiba no Shoji. Tomiko had spent years at the capital in court service and had only just returned home. She was graceful in the particular, practiced way of someone who has learned a palace's manners, and the match was arranged with the brisk relief of people trying to close a door before anything else could come through it. The wedding went well enough. It was the second night, with the wine still warm in him, that Toyoo made the mistake of teasing his new wife about the fine gentleman she must have known at court. A joke, nothing more. The kind of thing a happy husband says without thinking. Tomiko's face lifted toward him, and the voice that answered was not Tomiko's voice at all. "You forget an old bond so easily," it said, with an old and terrible patience. "For a plain, unremarkable woman with nothing about her worth remembering. You say I am the one you resent, but it is you who are cruel enough to say so." It went on, almost fondly, reminding him that what had passed between them was deeper than the sea and higher than the mountains, sworn before whatever gods watch such promises get made, and that a vow was not so easily set aside for the sake of strangers he'd chosen to trust over her. If he tried again to push her away, she told him, she would see to it that his blood ran down from the mountain peaks of Ki to the valleys below, and that whatever life remained to him would not be worth the having. From behind a folding screen, Moroya's voice added its own cheerful congratulations on the marriage, as though nothing at all were wrong. Toyoo did not remember, afterward, how the night ended. He remembered only lying face down on the floor, unable to move, while the household around him went on pretending, for as long as it possibly could, that this was only an ordinary wedding night after all. By morning, there was no more pretending to do. Shoji, white-faced, sent for a wandering monk from Kurama, who happened to be lodging nearby on his way to Kumano, a man with a considerable local reputation for driving out illness and pestilence, and the occasional restless spirit. The monk arrived confident, mixed a preparation of real gar into a small jar of water, and announced, not unkindly, that this would not take long, that whatever was troubling the household, be it plague spirit or crop blight or common haunting, was well within the ordinary range of his work. It did not take long. He opened the door to the bridal chamber and found the doorway filled, entirely filled, by a serpent's head as white as packed snow, eyes like polished mirrors, horns like weathered deadwood, a mouth wide enough to have made the question of his confidence entirely academic. He did not so much retreat as fall backward out of the room, and by the time the household reached him, his skin had already begun to darken and burn, as though he had been laid too close to a fire that wasn't there. He tried to speak, that this had been no ordinary haunting, that a spirit with this much standing owed no obedience to a man of his modest station, that he was sorry. He should never have promised what he had no power to deliver. Then nothing came at all. By evening, he was dead. Chapter 7. What was buried at Dōjō-ji. Toyoo, watching a man die of fear on his behalf, decided that he would rather face the thing himself than let it cost anyone else what it had just cost the monk from Kurama. He went back into the room. Minago, speaking still through Tomiko's mouth and Tomiko's stillness, did not threaten him first this time. She asked him, almost gently, why he kept sending strangers to do what he could not bring himself to say to her directly. "I have never once asked you for more than what you already promised freely," she said. "It is only ever other people telling you to be afraid of me. Let them go, and let us go together, and none of this needs to happen again." Toyoo, past arguing, asked for only one thing in return, that whatever came next, Tomiko herself be spared. In exchange, he offered to go wherever the thing wanted, so long as it left the household in peace. She agreed to this so readily, so happily, that it frightened him more than the threats had. Shoji would not accept that trade. He had heard of a priest at Dōjō-ji in Komatsubara, an old man named Hokkai, said to be the most spiritually accomplished exorcist in the province, though age had kept him mostly confined to his own quarters for years. Shoji rode through the night to reach him, and Hokkai, hearing the whole account without visible surprise, did not hesitate the way the Kurama monk had failed to hesitate enough. "This is not beyond me," he said, "but it will take more than confidence." He gave Shoji a kesa, a priest's robe, steeped in mustard seed incense, with plain instructions. Draw the creature into the open, throw the robe over it, and hold it down with everything he had until Hokkai himself arrived. "Let go," the old man warned, and it would be gone before he could tighten his grip again, and it would not forgive him for having tried. Toyoo did exactly that. He told Minago that Shoji had finally granted them leave to go together, watched her face brighten with something that might, in another creature, have been called joy, and threw the kesa over her the instant she rose to follow him. "You are hurting me," she said, very quietly, as he held her down with both arms shaking. "Only loosen your hands, only for a moment." It was the first time in the whole of their acquaintance that Toyoo did not do what she asked. Hokkai arrived by palanquin not long after, already murmuring the low, steady words of a man who has done this exact work many times before, and expects to do it once more without particular drama. When Toyoo lifted the robe at his instruction, Tomiko lay beneath it unconscious, and coiled on top of her, entirely still, was a white serpent longer than a man is tall. Hokkai's disciple caught it into an iron alms bowl. A second, smaller serpent, no longer than a forearm, emerged from behind the folding screen where it had been waiting out the whole ordeal, and went into the same bowl after it, wrapped tight in the scented robe, sealed by whatever quiet authority an old man's whole life of prayer can earn him. Hokkai carried the bowl back to Dōjō-ji and had it buried deep in the earth before the main hall. with instructions that it never be disturbed again. It is said the mound is there still. Tomiko did not recover from what had been done to her, however gently the ending had been managed. She sickened in the weeks after and died before the year was out. Toyoo lived on, the way people live on after the worst thing that will ever happen to them has already happened. Carefully, quietly, and with a permanent low awareness of how very easily his life might have gone the other way entirely.